Welcome to Blind Man and the Elephant. These are your hosts, Niraj and Osho.
This is a podcast where two friends discuss a whole host of ideas that range from across the spectrum, from economics to culture, politics to sport. And we hope to bring our fresh perspective to things that are happening around us.
We live in times where there is an information overload. So this is our attempt to make some sense of the noise.
You can listen to us on all major podcast streaming apps, including Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, and Anchor, as well as, of course, YouTube. You can check out all our links in the description along with this episode.
So without much further ado, let's begin today's episode.
The confusing state of America. So, Niraj, have you been following the American elections and what's been happening?
Dude, there is no way I can't follow the American election unless I've been living without the internet or something, because that is all everyone is talking about. It at work, when I'm trying to socialize over Zoom or whatever it is. This is all that's been spoken about right now.
I think we should clarify that we are recording this at 11 p.m. on Thursday, 5th November. Looks like Biden's going to win. We don't know.
There is no way I'm going to call this one because it's been surprising to say the least. Because it's been so unexpected, and I can't even begin to imagine what Americans are going through right now. You know, it's probably a whole host of emotions, and it's literally the entire spectrum they're probably dealing with. It's crazy times we live in.
I don't know why you're surprised. Quite frankly, I don't know why you're surprised. If they elected Donald Trump in 2016, could anything be more surprising than that, yaar?
I mean, that was before Donald Trump, as we know him today, had done a 4-year term, right? So, I mean, it was still a surprise in 2016, but in 2020, the fact that the race is this close is interesting.
So for one, we know that the last time this election was happening, he hadn't put babies in cages yet. What else had he not done?
Oh man. I mean, some of these things are things that he had spoken about all along. Yeah. And people just assume that he's going to be your everyday average politician Joe, ironically. Usually, you have politicians who make promises like, oh, we're going to build a wall in Mexico. Who in their right mind would have thought that this is something that is probably actually something that is going to happen in the long run? And we see so many other issues, even closer to home, because we know so many of our Indian friends who often want to go and immigrate to America. The fact that the H-1B visa is a huge issue.
Yeah, and
the fact that, of course, he cancelled it. And then the biggest of them all, in a pandemic, he's also stopped funding the WHO. Let's not even begin there. But I mean, that was one of the most hard-hitting things I can think of.
I mean, with Trump, at least we now know that the mask is off. He never wore one.
Yeah, absolutely. And, no matter how this election concludes, right? Yeah. We know that America is now clearly a different country. I don't know from 2016, but at least over the last decade, it's now clearly a different country where nearly half the voters, as we're seeing the numbers, have seen Trump in all his splendor. His infantile tirades, his disastrous policies, his contempt for democracy. I mean, I don't even know where to begin on those points, right? And somehow, somewhere, they've resonated with it and decided that they want more of it. They're not feigning ignorance about how Trump would rule, They've kind of embraced him.
Yeah, no matter what happens with the final outcome, more Americans have voted for Trump this time than the last time. And they saw that he's probably going to lose, and more people have come out and made this election as close as it is.
Yeah.
It's really strange that when we from outside America look at it and think of it as this huge melting pot where, you can be anything you want, do anything you want, become anything you want. You're seeing this kind of
American dream.
Yeah. You're seeing this happen. So I mean, that's why we're talking about it today, right? But what do you think? Why do you think it's so polarized? Why do you think it's so divided?
What I found interesting, just looking at the map, right, which has been paraded around on every news channel and Google and everywhere. You see the map, you see red all over the center in the heartland, or so to say. And then you see the blue across the coast and in the famous sort of cities we know about, like New York, and like, you've got California and Washington and so on. Even if you were to slightly deep dive into a state and look at their urban centers, those are all the blue parts. But then the minute you move away from the rich or the urban areas, that's where you start seeing a stark difference in their voting trends. And that's something that really interests me. It piques my interest as to why this is.
I think it's because cities in America have become so diverse and they've become such crazy places where the best ideas sort of come together, and you see cutting edge stuff happening in those cities, and you see people from everywhere. You see different kinds of opinions being shared, and that's just not happening in the rural areas. That's somehow not going across into the more traditional whiter places that exist.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, because I mean, cities include, like in the US, that means places like Silicon Valley or New York City, where I mean, these places don't need any introductions. But it also means what you said, right, about diversity. I think that's important, where they've become such melting pots for the entire world. You have immigrants and people coming from all over the world, including, I'm sure, some of our relatives at some point of time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Cities have been places of opportunity and cities have been places of churning. You've seen all your civil rights movements for black rights and all of that happen largely in cities. You've seen movements for LGBT rights happen primarily in cities. You've seen most amount of awareness around environment, around class divides, such as the Occupy movement, all of those things happening in cities. So you're always alive to people who are different from you and problems that maybe aren't your own.
I think that's powerful. Yeah, that's what cities essentially bring. Like, even if I were to draw the parallel to India, right? Like, you have urban centers where you have more and more people who don't look alike, who don't speak alike, who don't think alike, and they're forced by location to live in the same place and interact with each other on a daily basis. And it would then shape the kind of people they are.
Exactly. You have to be more accommodative. You have to understand what the other person is saying. You have to at least try to, give a shit about what's going on in other people's lives. Like, you can't just be brash and just be how you always were.
Do you also think it's a class divide thing? Do you think it's a rich versus poor thing also? To me, it just seems like the cities generally tend to be more rich than say their non-urban counterparts. Do you think it's that? I'm not too sure about this myself, but do you have any idea about this?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that those people in rural areas, in semi-urban areas, who have seen a large loss of jobs, and that's why things like climate change became important in America, right? People who had coal jobs, people who were reliant on the oil economy, all of these people, working class people, people who were reliant on the automobile industry that went bust after the 2008 crisis. All of these working class people saw that what the liberal world was saying about free trade and all of those things was really not benefiting them. And that's why that section of the poorer community in America realized that Democrats and generally the more liberal party was not an option for them. But at the same time, there has been a growing support for people like Bernie Sanders, AOC, all of these people. Even the Democrats generally have now become more accommodative and try to sort of go left, because they're also understanding that poorer people are looking out for opportunities and for state support. Like, that's another class of people who don't like Republicans or don't like Trump.
Osho, what I find very interesting about America specifically is the Republicans usually are associated with, capitalism or, high profits or
Yeah.
companies which, like no corporate tax and those kind of concepts, right? Whereas in most other countries, you see that working class people would not support a party which is,
Yeah.
all for about cutting corporate taxes.
Yeah.
But in America, it turns itself on its head in a way wherein the more sort of socialist slash left in quotes
Yeah.
party is considered as
Anti-poor.
anti-poor. Yeah.
I think in America, for you to be conservative means being conservative about old American values such as the free market, such as just relying on the fact that the corporate environment is going to do great things for you, that you're
Yeah.
going to become that billionaire who is going to have great money, and anything that stops you from like excelling on that path is a problem.
America has seen growth like that. Like that is what defines America in the 19th and the 20th century,
Yeah.
essentially. So that is essentially the recipe for success, or so to say, in America. What do you think about this thing that I've been reading about, wherein the Democrats are increasingly competing for the votes of a ever increasing voter base? By which I mean that the Republicans right now are representing a very particular part of the demographic of America. And they're very strong there. The people belonging to that demographic, say the conservatives, they all clearly have one party to support.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the Democrats, because of America being such a two-party system, the Democrats are now supporting such a wide base of voters that I can imagine that a lot of people cannot even resonate with Biden, but are probably maybe forced to choose him as the lesser of two evils. And that's not a pleasant place to be in, right? Like you want that representation. And a lot of political economists, etc., have been saying that this is what is causing the votes or the final elections to look this close.
Yeah.
Is because there is one side of the masses which knows who to vote for, and there's another side who's forced to vote for someone. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I mean, in any other country, maybe there would be a Republican Party similar to America's, but you would not have one Democrat Party.
Absolutely.
Because there are so many diverse views, so many different opinions within the Democratic Party. I think that the reason why Republicans are so consolidated in their votes and why they're so successful in how they have sort of controlled power for so many years is because of the fact that there is a strong anxiety that America is becoming different, that it's not the white America that you are familiar with. And the lack of that familiarity means that you are doing everything you can to preserve it, which is why 1 week before the election, 2 weeks before the elections, everyone was like, Trump is gone, look at these opinion polls, there's no way Trump is coming back. But then what happened? What happened was that all these large groups of people who were so anxious, and this is somewhat of a link to our previous episode, these anxieties showed themselves in full force on election day.
Just to go even to the most basic instinct, like, forget painting people who are voting for one side or the other as good or bad or evil and whatever. It's just about demonizing the other.
Yeah.
You're just so scared of not knowing who you are, or just sort of seeing what you represent or what you believe in slowly disappearing. I think that is that anxiety that you speak of. I mean, think about it in simple terms. If you went to office, right? You've been working at a workplace for 5 to 10 years. Let's say you're working for 10 years. The first 5 years, you've grown with certain number of people in the company. You love all of them. You're great friends. You share lunch. But then 6th year onwards, there's some massive change in management, and suddenly they're plugging in people from all over the world. They're plugging in people from different cultures. And suddenly you're having lunch on your own. And that's what people are scared about.
Yeah, people are really scared to have lunch on their own.
Yeah.
That's very, very true. That somehow brings us to why Trump is so popular. Some people call him crazy. We all have just basically labeled him and dismissed him as just a loony who can't get anything right. But clearly there are many people who think that he can. Surely he's not an idiot. Surely there's something right that he's doing. What do you think?
There's just this analysis about his speeches that I can recollect when you say that, right?
Is this the Nerd Writer video?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it is. Yes. If I'm not wrong.
We'll link that in the show notes.
Yes, we'll do that. But there they actually break down Trump's speeches, and at the end of it, you end up thinking, "Damn, this man is smart." Which is literally the opposite of what, say, media has fed you or what you've thought about. Which is, if you look at the vocabulary he used, the simple way he ends up constructing sentences, the way he ends them and begins them and so on, it's a fascinating video. And at the end of it, what you realize is he's appealing to the most simple folk who don't want to get into these fancy political speeches with people coming from whatever their Harvard backgrounds and so on. And yes, he is from Wharton as well.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, he's appealing to people in the simplest of terms. Oh, there is an evil, you gotta keep them out of here. We're gonna boost the economy.
Build the wall.
Exactly.
Simple.
Exactly.
Stop the count.
Exactly. And I think keeping it simple is what he specializes in, and that's what the beauty of what he's sort of tried to do in the last 4 years is.
That's what Trump is so fascinating, because he's lived in New York all his life.
Yeah.
Lived on the top of Trump Tower. Religiously played golf every weekend in his golf course in Florida on public money.
And had a casino called the Taj Mahal in Atlantic City.
And what does all of that translate into in terms of political messaging? Nothing.
Yeah.
Trump is the simple guy who is relating to the people who really hate all these people who come from these big universities, use all these fancy words, talk in these isms and these like 10-syllable words which you can't understand, and just make a movement out of anything, and just relaying the vocabulary that you hear about people who vote for Trump, right?
It's crazy, right? Because he is a reality show star. He had his own show.
Yeah.
He's also basically been like the American dream, as in an entrepreneur, and like made it big and like fancy and real estate and all of that. It's actually not that hard then to think about why he's so popular. Like it seems quite obvious when you look at it from that angle, right?
Definitely. You know what this also tells us? The fact that we're at the edge of a second Trump term. Maybe it won't happen, but we've come really close to it. What that tells us is that America is just like any other country. In India, we've seen really flawed political leaders all our lives. I mean, America keeps glorifying Reagan and Bush and Obama and all of these people, and then they gave us Trump. This just reminds me of this quote that I read by Eddie Glaude, who's a professor of African American studies at Princeton University. And I quote, "America is not unique in its sins as a country. We are not unique in our evils. I think where we might be singular is in our refusal to acknowledge them and the legends and the myths we tell about our inherent goodness, to hide and cover and conceal so that we can maintain a willful ignorance that protects our innocence." And I think this innocence, this whole thing of America denying that there's a racism problem, a large part of America denying that there's a racism problem, a large part of America denying that they're the ones who are contributing to the world going to shit in terms of climate change. I mean, Trump, if you believe Trump, climate change is a hoax, right? So America has done some phenomenal marketing in terms of convincing the world that it's really unique and the people who stay there are very different because they have the Statue of Liberty and have this great idea of the American dream. But brother, you've brought Trump.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, if you were to take it to
Where it goes from here.
where it goes from here, I think as the vote is playing out, it definitely seems that Biden is probably going to become the next president.
Yeah.
But it does reveal a lot about half the electorate, right? Americans are not going to feel that sense of satisfaction when they wake up the next day or for the next 4 years. An article that I read actually by Tom Nichols in The Atlantic, which is probably quite controversial, and it's titled "A Large Portion of the Electorate Chose the Sociopath," therefore being controversial, says something very interesting. Like, it's an interesting analogy, right? It says, American voters are now like drunks who have been bailed out of jail in the morning, full of relief as their lawyers explain that the police aren't pressing charges. If Biden wins, we will have a second chance to keep our democracy intact. Some of us will have a moment of clarity, but most of us will just want to go home, throw up, change our clothes, and hope for the best. But many millions, eyes dimming and livers failing, are still reaching for the bottle.
The grim times we live in.
So then, Osho, yes, on this very happy note, I think we can end our episode.
Yeah, I think it was our duty to just talk about this whole event that was happening all through this week.
Yeah, because honestly, there was nothing else we could think about this week, to be
Yeah,
honest. Like,
this is what
we tried to rack our brains for another topic. We were like, okay, maybe not the political side of things, but
This is on everybody's mind.
yeah, and we're human too. So,
Yep.
on that note,
Yeah, tell us what you guys think. Please like, please share
yeah,
this with everybody. And yeah, tune in next week. Thank you so much.
see you.